Maine Income Tax Residency and Non-Residency, Maine Revenue Services. The information in this video is intended solely as advice to assist persons in determining and complying with their obligations. It is written in a relatively informal style and is intended to provide an overview of Maine tax law. See laws and rules on the MRS website at www.maine.gov/revenue. Taxpayers are responsible for complying with all applicable tax statutes and rules. Videos do not have the same legal force and effect as laws or rules. Are you unsure about whether you should file your Maine income tax return as a Maine resident? That's an important question. We will walk you through the types of residency. Let's review the basic rules. A Maine resident is someone who is domiciled in Maine or who qualifies as a statutory resident of this state. You are a statutory resident if you spent more than 183 days in Maine during the tax year and maintained a permanent place of abode in Maine for the entire tax year. More on that later. If you are a Maine resident for the entire tax year, in most cases you must pay Maine tax on all of your taxable income regardless of its source or where it is earned. A non-resident taxpayer is an individual who earns income in Maine but is not a Maine resident for income tax purposes. If you are a non-resident, you must pay Maine tax only on your Maine source income, including wages and other income from work performed in this state, income from the sale of Maine property, and Maine income from a pass-through entity. A part-year resident of Maine is an individual who is domiciled in Maine only for a part of the tax year and who is not a statutory resident in that year. If you are a part-year resident of Maine, you must pay tax on all of your income for the part of the year you are a Maine resident, and you must also pay tax on any income derived from Maine sources during the part of the year you are a non-resident. A safe harbor resident is a person who is domiciled in Maine but is not considered a Maine resident for income tax purposes because of special provisions in the law. More on safe harbors coming up. Domiciled in Maine? Simply put, your domicile is your place of legal residence. Everyone is domiciled somewhere, and no one can be domiciled in more than one state at a time. Your domicile is generally the place where you reside and which is the center of your domestic, social, and civic life. Unless you are a safe harbor resident, if you are domiciled in the state of Maine, you are a Maine resident for income tax purposes, even if you are outside the state for the entire tax year. If you move out of Maine temporarily, without establishing domicile in another state or country, you continue to be domiciled in Maine. This is the case even if you sell your home in Maine. Once your domicile is established in Maine, it continues until you establish domicile somewhere else. Maine law provides safe harbors for certain individuals to be treated as non-residents even though they are domiciled in Maine. Safe harbor residents are individuals who for the entire tax year don't maintain a home in Maine but do maintain a home outside of Maine and spend no more than 30 days in Maine during the year, or individuals who reside in a foreign country for a significant amount of time. If you think you might qualify for one of these safe harbors, consult the Maine Revenue Service's Guidance to Residency Safe Harbors at www.maine.gov/revenue. The taxpayer has the burden of showing that they have established domicile in another state or country. Domicile determinations are made on a case-by-case basis. Some relevant factors may include location of principal residence, where you spend the most amount of time, whether you applied for a homestead or veterans property tax exemption in Maine or a comparable benefit in another state, where your spouse or dependents reside or attend school, where you are registered to vote, what state issued your driver's license, and where your vehicles are registered. Factors that are not considered in determining domicile: whether your charitable contributions were made to an organization located in or outside of Maine, the geographic location of the financial institutions you use, and the location of your professional advisors, such as doctors, lawyers, and accountants. If I am domiciled in another state, could I still be taxed as a Maine resident? You may still be taxed as a Maine resident if you are not in the military and qualify as a statutory resident. You are a statutory resident if you spent more than 183 days in Maine during the tax year and maintained a permanent place of abode in Maine for the entire tax year. A permanent place of abode is a house, apartment, dwelling place, or other residence that an individual maintains as his or her household, whether or not he or she owns the residence. Did you maintain a permanent place of abode in Maine, but claim you were domiciled elsewhere and that you were not present in Maine for more than 183 days in the tax year? Keep adequate records to verify more than half the year was spent in another state. Records confirming your whereabouts commonly include planners, calendars, plane tickets, canceled checks, and credit card and other receipts. Once you've determined your residency status, identify what forms you may need to file. Are you a full-year Maine resident? File Maine Form 1040-ME. Are you a non-resident, part-year resident, or a safe harbor resident? File Form 1040-ME, including worksheets A, B, and C if applicable, and Schedule NR for non-residents, part-year residents, or safe harbor residents. You may elect to file a return as a single in certain circumstances, even if your filing status is married filing joint on your federal tax return. To do so, file Form 1040-ME, including Worksheet A and Schedule NRH. For more information, including specific residency and filing rules that apply to resident and non-resident aliens, military personnel, and students, visit the Maine Revenue Service's website or email mrs@income.tax@maine.gov or call MRS.